still see, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Marty Cosgrove, and I'm a prosecutor at the Attorney General's office in Georgetown.
My name's Chris Hutchison. I work for a firm called Able Defense. I was formerly a prosecutor. Kind of been all over the map when it comes to practicing law.
And Ms. Taylor explained a little bit about your class and what you guys are learning about, and maybe what you're interested in going into. So I'll give you a little bit of my background first, and then Chris can give you his background. Kind of the route that I took to get where I am. I went to the University of Delaware, and then I went to law school at Roger Williams University up in Rhode Island, with the idea of actually being a prosecutor. When I was at University of Delaware, I was a criminal justice major at Delaware, and was able to do an internship with the Attorney General's office in Wilmington for a summer while I was in there. And being a kind of a college intern, I couldn't do a lot of the heavy lifting, but was able to kind of help out on one of the cases I worked on was a homicide case in Wilmington, and kind of following day to day what they had to do through a homicide trial. I became really interested in being an attorney, especially being a prosecutor, seeing what they did and advocating for victims' rights. So I went to law school with the idea of working at the Attorney General's office in Wilmington, and was able, when I finished law school, to get a job with the Attorney General's office. And I started in Wilmington and was up there for a couple of years, and then was able to transfer down to the Georgetown office when there was an opening to be able to come back home to Sussex County where I grew up. I've been there about 22 years. I left for a couple years in private practice, and frankly enjoyed the Attorney General's office more than civil practice. So kind of started out, we have several different court systems in Delaware, and kind of how they train young prosecutors. We start in the lower level courts and kind of work our way up as we gain experience and knowledge. So I started at Justice of the Peace Courts, and you all have seen Justice of the Peace Courts all around the county, right? You can nod, you don't. Yes, we've seen them everywhere. They have a couple flagpoles out in front of them. So we would prosecute driving under the influence alcohol charges there. We don't really go there for much else. Most of what they handle on the criminal side is like speeding tickets and things like that. But they would send us out to do the DUI charges. And then I went to Court of Common Pleas, which is, our local one is in Georgetown, in the big courthouse on the circle. You all know where that is? Yes. Okay. So
You guys can use your reactions too. Use your buttons at the bottom.
Oh, do you have like a thumbs up button or
give
something?
us a thumbs up.
All right. All right, cool. So, Court of Common Pleas handles misdemeanor charges and driving offenses. So that's a high volume type court where, you know, they would put 60 or 70 trials on a day, and we would just have to kind of muddle through those. And most of the cases in our system don't go to trial, they get resolved by a plea somehow. I did some time in family court, and our family court in Delaware, which is on the other side of the circle from the courthouse, the main courthouse, they, as far as for criminal cases, we would prosecute juveniles that were charged with either misdemeanors or felonies. And then I progressed on to Superior Court, and even in Superior Court there's less serious felony type cases all the way up to homicides, which are the most serious thing that we handle. So I've handled from DUIs, we have felony DUIs in Delaware, I've handled felony DUIs, I ran the sex crimes unit in Sussex County for a while, and then have prosecuted numerous homicides. Currently, I'm the unit head of something called the felony screening unit. And the felony screening unit The job of that is to take all of the people that are arrested on felony level charges. They have something called a preliminary hearing right after they get arrested. And my job is to look at those cases, make sure the cops did what they were supposed to do. And if I can help the police make the case a little better, I do that. But I also look at the cases that are maybe don't need to be prosecuted as felonies and reduce them. Some of them I just get rid of if I don't like the way the police arrested them. I don't think there's enough evidence to prosecute the case, or I give the file back to the police and tell them they need to go back to work and bring me a better case so I can send it up to the trial deputies in Superior Court. So that's kind of how I got there, or got here, and what I'm currently doing. I'll let Chris tell you his circuitous route to where he is.
Thank you, Marty. I went to Widener University and then followed that into Widener Law School. I think my initial goal was to be an FBI. When I was in law school, 9/11 happened and everybody wanted to go in the FBI. So while I was in my, I believe, second year of law school, I did a clerkship with the Delaware Department of Justice and just kind of fit. So I ended up being a prosecutor for about 12 years. And a few years ago, I left and went into private practice. I primarily do criminal defense now, and that my time as a prosecutor kind of gives me a pretty good insight into how to defend a case. And Marty and I will get into this in a little bit, but whether you're prosecuting or defending a case, and this is something I think people don't quite realize, the approach is almost similar. It's not exact, but at the end of the day, prosecutors and defense attorneys are just trying to do the right thing. So having that background as a prosecutor really gives you a lot of insight into what a case is worth and how it should ultimately resolve. As a prosecutor, like Marty, I kind of rose through the ranks from starting off doing DUI, juvenile prosecution, to working undercover drug cases, gang-related cases, and homicide cases. Before I left, I supervised what's called the felony trial unit, which is pretty much what it sounds like. You're overseeing the prosecutors that are trying felony level cases. So Marty and I have worked cases together as co-prosecutors. We've worked cases together as opposing counsel. And really, before I go any further, if there's ever a time you guys have questions or anything, we're here for you. So we can certainly fill up time talking, but if there's anything that you want to particularly get into or something you're interested about, by all means, ask us, and we've got no problem going down any path you want.
And if you want us to stop, I guess you could wave or something, and so we don't pass over something that if we're talking about it that you want to know a little bit more about.
Okay, and I see a good question here. It's a question, so what made me want to start being a defense attorney rather than a prosecutor? And that's a good question. There's a number of reasons. For me, it got to a point where I kind of felt that I had done pretty much everything I was going to do as a prosecutor, and I was looking for a new challenge. Certainly the prospect of being in business for myself was nice after being in government practice for a while. And I think everybody at some point in their career decides, it's time to try something new. And you guys are going to see that as you get older. But for me, it was just, I kind of reflected on where I was in my career and felt that, maybe I wasn't as enthusiastic about the job, and it seemed like I just wanted to try something new.
I see Miracle just put a question up about the FBI, and I can speak about this a little bit, and Chris can speak about it. There was a guy that was in my office years ago, and he made a decision to switch out and become an FBI agent. So the requirements to be an FBI agent, you have to have a 4-year degree. And generally, they like people not necessarily right out of college, maybe have a couple years working in some other job, so they're not like right out of college into the FBI, so they have some real life experience, and then start applying. The gentleman in question that worked with me, his name's Sean Devereaux, he left, and he kind of left right after 9/11. So it's been quite a while. It's almost 20 years at this point. But at that point in time, the FBI was big into counterterrorism. They still are big into counterterrorism. And watching him kind of go through the training for the FBI and then the different positions he's had, he's kind of stayed on the East Coast and worked in the Washington, D.C. field office, the Philadelphia field office, and he's now the number 2 at the Baltimore field office. And that is intense. It's intense work, but the stuff he's told me he's been able to do with Middle East counterterrorism and the FBI SWAT team has been fantastic. So I would encourage any of you, if you're interested in federal law enforcement, and it's not like the job that the local police have in Delaware or any state. They're taking care of bigger world pictures. The FBI is doing less of cops and robbers type things and more violent crime and international crime. So it's a fantastic place to work if anyone's interested in that.
Looks like we have a question. When you're handling a case, do you ever get the feeling of guilt? Absolutely. And there's several levels of guilt. For me, and I know Marty has done this as well, when you're handling cases, whether you're prosecuting or a defense attorney, you're dealing with real lives and real issues. And a lot of times you watch TV and you see people being, there's a very bright line of good versus bad. In reality, it's not always the case. There's a lot of things that go into, whatever the case may be. For me, I spent a few years handling fatal accidents, and you're prosecuting vehicular homicides. And almost every one of those cases where people, innocent people were killed, and the person that was responsible was a person that just made one bad decision, had a bad night, maybe had a few beers too many, got behind the wheel, made one mistake, and they're going to pay for it for the rest of their lives. And you go home at night and you realize there is, somebody who doesn't have a family member, and someone else is going to be going to jail over it. And it's certainly something you take to bed with you, and especially when you're prosecuting homicide cases, there's really never a happy ending. Somebody's going to end up paying dearly, and at the end of the day, you're not going to do what would be considered justice, which is bringing back someone who died. So it really does weigh on you, but it's something that you kind of do it for a greater cause.
And I'll say, that there were 2 questions. It was about guilt, and it was also about crying in court. I had said earlier that I ran the sex crimes unit, and those are very difficult cases. And whether it's a sexual assault on an adult or a sexual assault on a child, they're heart-wrenching cases, and there's a lot of jail time involved. It's upsetting to talk to victims that have been victimized. Chris was talking about homicide cases. Having to go talk to a family about their family member that was murdered, whether it was by a motor vehicle or a bullet or a knife. There's no good answer, and you can't fix it. We can't bring people back. We try to right the wrong, but you can't bring a dead person back. And as far as being upset in court, I was one of the 2 prosecutors on the Chad Spicer case, Are you guys familiar with that case? The police officer that was murdered in Georgetown about 10 years ago. Chad Spicer was a Georgetown police officer that was killed while he was on duty chasing a guy that had done an armed robbery in Georgetown. And Chad was shot in the face effectively and died on a street in Georgetown about 2 blocks from the courthouse. And I was the #2 prosecutor on the case. And that was, you know, we worked very closely with police officers. We hadn't had a police officer killed in the state of Delaware in that way. So it was a serious case. I knew Chad, I knew his family, and that was very difficult to prosecute on many levels. With all the police that we all had to work with, they have a tough job, and you see it on the news every night. They've got a tough job. And to see one of them killed doing their job was difficult to be a part of. And as far as the question, have you cried in court? That was a death penalty case. We currently don't have the death penalty in Delaware anymore. We did then. And the hardest thing I've ever had to do in a courtroom was when in a murder trial, in a death penalty case, there's 2 parts. There's the actual trial where the jury establishes guilt or innocence. And then there's a second part of the trial, which is like a mini trial where the jury decides whether the death penalty will be administered. And it's a whole separate set of hearings. I had to stand in front of, the jury's 12 and we had 6 alternates, so there were 18 people. And I had to stand in front of 18 people and ask them to kill someone. And that, I thought going into it, it would not be hard. When I actually stood there and had to ask that of those 18 people, it knocked the breath out of me. And it was a moral stretch for me. It was difficult to do that. That's what the law said and what I had to do. But that was nearly brought me to tears having to do that.
Let's see.
Can we scroll back?
Yeah, and
on the question.
And if you guys bear with us, we're getting a lot of questions almost at the same time. So if it seems like we've missed a question,
I'm trying to scroll back
one of
up.
us is going to be, as one is answering a question, the other will be scrolling down to make sure we're not missing anything.
I think this is the next one that you have, the one about the student that couldn't make it today.
Okay, and actually this is probably one for me, although I will point out both Marty and I, we've both been defense attorneys at different parts of our career. The question is, have you ever been unable to defend someone because you knew they were guilty? I get that question a lot, and the interesting thing about it is, in a lot of the cases we deal with, and I can tell you over 18 years, very few cases that I deal with, somebody is 100% completely innocent. There are levels of not guilty, and there's a difference between being not guilty and being innocent. Being not guilty means certain elements of the law don't apply to what factually a particular person did. When you're dealing with someone who is guilty, a lot of what we deal with doesn't necessarily focus on guilt or innocence. It focuses on the behavior and making sure that the trial is fair, that certain rights were honored. So my mindset when I deal with a client, obviously on the forefront, one thing you do want to make sure is this person innocent? And that's certainly a question you're looking at. Oftentimes, the more important aspect is trying to figure out what the best result would be, whether there's treatment that's needed. So a lot of times you're really not even looking at really the guilt side of it. There's just different levels, and I know that's kind of a complicated answer. What do you want to explain?
Well, and I probably answered from my side of the table. as a prosecutor, I will assure all of you that the police that we have in Delaware and in Sussex County are better than most. I think that the hiring practices of the Delaware State Police are good, and we have good cops. There are bad cops just like there are bad doctors and bad teachers and bad lawyers, but for the most part, I think we have a pretty good police system in Delaware. The cases, for the most part, that the police bring to the Attorney General's office for prosecution are good cases. I have had cases where I read police reports and I don't think the person did it, and if I don't think they did it, I get rid of the case. Morally and ethically, I can't go forward on a case if I don't believe that the person did it. So that's, you know, I'm kind of, the prosecutors are kind of part of the vetting process of a case in the criminal justice system. Before a case even sees a courtroom, a prosecutor has reviewed the case, whether it's a misdemeanor case or a felony level case. And if it's not a good case, whether I think the person didn't do it or the cop did a bad job, I get rid of it, because I'm not, you know, my job is to prosecute people that have committed crimes, and if I don't think they committed it, it's gone. I have enough good cases to work on, and an ethical obligation that if it's not a good case, it goes away. So guilty people, how I deal with guilty people, I prosecute them. If I don't think somebody did it, the case goes away. That never sees the inside of the courtroom.
Let's see. When do you think would be a good time to retire?
Yesterday.
Yes. When you make enough money and you can actually step aside and not have to do it. You know, there are different answers. I know I liked being a prosecutor. I like what I do now. I like helping people. And, you know, defense attorneys help people just like prosecutors help people. For me, I like to work, so I'm not really sure when I'll retire. I always say they'll probably carry me out, you know, in a coroner's bag at some point. But I think everybody has a different level, you know. Some people want to retire at 55. Some people want to retire at 60. For me, when I can't do it anymore, I'm going to step aside.
I'm in the same boat. What's the hardest part to prepare a case?
Well,
I think you could probably talk about too the most difficult case you prosecuted if you want to get specific as well.
Well, if we go to the most, and Aaron, Ms. Taylor suggested that we talk about the most difficult case. All cases, it depends on the kind of case. They all have their challenges to prepare from either side. But several years ago, Chris and I worked on a double homicide case out of Millsboro, and it was a drug case, and chime in, Chris, if I start messing this up. It was highly complicated, where there were two drug dealers that were executed, and it took probably 2 years to almost 3 years to figure out who did it and get enough evidence to bring the case to the charging stage. And kind of the Reader's Digest is that there was a local kind of drug dealer who brought in relatives from Philadelphia to act as hitmen. They were doing home invasions on other drug dealers, and they ended up actually killing these two particular drug dealers. But to get from, we have 2 dead guys, to finding out who did it, we had, you know, they were shot with 3 different guns. We never recovered the guns. And using cell phone technology, video from stores, we put it together on who actually did it, and with some witnesses we're able to arrest these guys and have a series of trials that took a year to actually do all of the trials. Chris and I lived in the office for 3 years, and especially when we were in the trial phase of this, we did these 3 double homicide trials back to back to back. We were in the office till 10 or 11 o'clock just about every night. We were in there on Saturdays and Sundays because there were so many people that were witnesses, and it was so complicated to try to put this together. And you know, as a prosecutor, when you're putting a case together, when we present it to a jury, we have to kind of tell a story. And we tell the story, we do an opening statement to the jury, and then we do a closing statement to kind of sum up what happened. But how we tell the story during the trial is through witnesses. And there's kind of stylistic ways you can do it, where you can start at the end and then fill it in afterwards, or start at the beginning, and each witness is kind of a chapter in the book. And it's like one block at a time, you're building a wall. And you know, our job as prosecutors was to take each of these blocks and build a wall to the point where it tells a total story to give the jury enough information to then go deliberate. And we have to prove, you know, each of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt and have a unanimous jury, meaning all 12 of the jurors have to agree that we met this burden on each of the charges to get a conviction. So that was by far the hardest case that I've had to do in 20 years.
Well, and you talk about handling that. It's a team effort. Marty and I have worked a lot of cases together, and that's really by design, because we work well together, stylistically, philosophically. You know, everybody has different approaches to their cases, and not everybody works well together. Marty and I did. But we also had a paralegal that really almost was our kind of Johnny on the spot, fixing problems. You know, we had probably a 6-week-long wiretap investigation. And does everybody know what a wiretap is? Where you're basically listening to phone calls, and a lot of the behavior that goes down, you know, in the middle of the night. So there were a lot of times when Marty and I had to be, you know, in this room listening at, you know, 2, 3 in the morning, and then be in court at, you know, 8 or 9 in the morning. So there's not a whole, when he says that we lived at the office, we pretty much did. But from all those phone calls, there is just volumes and volumes and volumes of data that, you know, we need to sift through. And we had a paralegal that was just going through everything, organizing things. So I don't know if people are interested in getting into, you know, kind of paralegal work. That was some of the best work that I've seen. And not only that, even when we were in the middle of trial, there's little things, logistical things that you have to do. You know, we have to download a phone call onto a disc and play the disc to a jury. When you guys logged in, you probably heard some feedback. Multiply that by 10, that's pretty much what we were dealing with in court. We're dealing with audio equipment that nobody knew how to use.
And we're old, and we're not tech guys, so.
So we had a guy who was, you know, 19, 20 years old, who was in the courtroom teaching the judge how to use his own audio video equipment. So it really is a team effort, you know, getting that done. And I think that kind of segues into the next question, which was, how do you deal with the pressure of that? You know, that pressure really wears on you, and everybody has their own way of handling it. You know, Marty and I are both interested in sports. We both go to the gym. We both have kids that are involved in sports, so going to those events kind of help you decompress. For me, you know, one thing that I did that I didn't even realize I was doing, my wife pointed it out at some point. When I would get home, I would watch, and if you ever watch Comedy Central, there's, you know, The Office. There's just shows that they just run on a continuous loop. And I would just watch them over and over and over again, because I wasn't really paying attention. I was just unplugging and decompressing. And everybody has their own way of handling it, but the pressure is high, and in a way, that's why you do it. You do it to make a change. I mean, neither of us got into those type of cases because we love pressure. We got into it because somebody needs to do it, and we felt that we were the best to do it.
Yeah, the next question is, what was your first case, whether you were a prosecutor or defense? And I had done some CCP traffic stuff in Newcastle County when I was up there, but when I first came down to Sussex County, the way it used to be, when we would start, you come in for your first day and they would say, welcome to the office, and they would give you a stack of files and tell you how to go to court, or tell you to go to court, and not really teach you how to do anything. And the first day I went to JP Court to do DUIs, I showed up at the JP Court in Seaford, and there was a very young state trooper, and he kind of leaned over to me and he said, hey, I've never had one of these trials before. And I leaned forward to him and I said, hey, neither have I. And we went into court to go to trial, and there was a defense attorney named Vinnie Vickers, who's since retired, and Vinnie mopped us up all over the courtroom, and we lost terribly. So that was my memory of my first actual trial in Sussex County.
Mine's kind of embarrassing, so buckle up. It was like Marty. It was probably my first month in the office. It may have been my first day. In court of common plea, you're dealing with misdemeanor cases. 2 days a week, you would handle non-jury trials, which is really just a trial in front of a judge. And then every other Wednesday, you would handle jury trials. And it was lengthy because you might have 40 or 50 cases on that you're resolving throughout the day. And then around 4 o'clock, you start getting ready to pick your jury. So if you're going to have a trial, it's really starting later in the day, and you may not finish till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So on that particular day, I had about 50 cases, and a lot of them were DUIs and some speeding tickets. Nothing that was, really earth-shattering. And I had one that was, it was charged as indecent exposure. And I looked at the file, and I read the police report quickly, and there wasn't a whole lot there. It was basically a guy that was sunbathing, allegedly sunbathing naked on the beach. I didn't really look a whole lot at the name or the person, but all I knew from talking to one of the paralegals that was working in there was this guy's insisting on a trial. So I didn't really have a whole lot of time to look at it. I finished up everything, and now we're running right into just picking a jury. So I'm kind of reviewing the case, making sure my witnesses are there, and I look up, and the judge is saying, all right, we're going to bring everybody in. So they bring in, certain people. We're now picking the jury, and I'm so focused on picking the jury and dealing with the judge and dealing with the witnesses that I never actually looked at the person I was prosecuting, and I realized it was a man in probably his mid-70s. And as we got through maybe our first or second witness, I realized that it wasn't exactly what was reflected in the police report. The guy was wearing a kind of a flesh-colored bikini bathing suit, which, and I get it, in and of itself should be against the law, but the allegation was that he had rolled it down to try and minimize his tan lines. I swear I'm not making this up. And that he may have rolled it down too far. Now at this point, by the time I've learned all that, I'm midway through the trial and really at the point of no return. So I just pushed through to the end, and I have a witness that is actually talking about, this guy's private parts and describing it, and it is uncomfortable as it sounds for me telling it. It was even worse in a courtroom in front of a jury. And I end up doing my closing, and I'm trying to, I'm kind of pulling it on the fly, and
No pun intended.
yeah, and I'm talking about, things hanging out, and whether he intended it or not, it's, this guy's, this guy's junk's hanging out in front of all these beachgoers, and I look up, and there's probably 7 or 8 jurors in the back that are themselves in their mid-70s, and they clearly don't like me. I'm probably 25. I'm sure I look like some young punk. And the jury goes back and they deliberate for about 20 minutes, and they come back and they couldn't reach an agreement. And when you can't reach an agreement, it's called a hung jury. And I just found that to be so fitting that in my first trial, it's an indecent exposure, and I get a hung jury. And at that point, the judge said, "Do you want to retry this case?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I walked away from it. And I think I see the guy, well, it's been a few years, but every now and then I'd see the guy walking around town, and he'd kind of give me a little wink. And you know what? It was, it taught me to review everything about your case, even the person you're prosecuting.
There's a question about the pay rate in the criminal justice system, and as far as work, whether you're a police officer or a prosecutor, you're working for the government, and kind of how the pay rate works on that is it's experience based. So kind of the longer you're in the Attorney General's office, it's years, and it's the type of cases that you're handling. So you're there longer and you're handling more and more serious cases. That's how you get your pay raises. So, when you start out, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, and when you look up 20 years later, you're kind of at the top, and your pay increases as you go along. And it's the same way in the police agencies. The more time you're in, you get promoted through the ranks from, trooper first class to trooper to trooper first class to corporal. And as you progress through the ranks, the higher the rank, the higher the pay. Chris's pay scale is a little different.
How hard is the
LSAT?
LSAT? I wouldn't say it's so much hard as it is kind of stupid.
There's word games and theory, critical thinking. There's some reading comprehension, but it's like an SAT without the math, really.
And I would say, if you're thinking about taking the LSAT, you have to do the study courses, because the courses teach you how to focus on the question. It's every question is kind of like a puzzle. And I never really understood, the correlation between the LSAT and your ability to be a lawyer
Or a law student.
But it's one of those things where they tell you have to do it, so you do your best to get through.
Yeah, it's a hoop you have to jump through. Frankly, it's a dumb test, and you have to take a course to take the test, and they tell you how to take the test, but it doesn't. There's no correlation between I did really well on the LSAT and I'm a great lawyer. I think the best lawyers are the people that didn't really do that well on the test. How is it when you have to try and pick out jurors? Every state has a different system for jury selection. There's something called voir dire, which it's a Latin phrase, and that's basically when you get to ask the jury questions. You want to know their backgrounds and things. In Delaware, the attorneys are not allowed to talk to the jurors at all. If you've seen movies and TV shows where they're doing the voir dire during jury selection and they're asking jurors questions, we don't get to do that in Delaware. So how our jury selection goes, in the big courtroom on the second floor in the courthouse, they'll put 120 people in the courtroom, and they'll pick the first 12. I'll go back a step. first they'll ask the whole panel if they know anybody in the case. So they would say, do you know the prosecutor? Do you know the defense attorney? Do you know anybody that works at the Attorney General's office? And do you know the witnesses? And that would be the police officers, any civilian witnesses, or the defendant. If those people know or think they know anybody, they have to go up and talk to the judge. They're also asked, are you able, this is a DUI case, or this is a homicide. Is there any reason that you wouldn't be able to do this case, or sit on this case? Maybe they have a family member that got a DUI, maybe they have a family member that was killed by a drunk driver, or a family member that was murdered, and they don't think that they would be a fair and impartial juror. So each of those prospective jurors would come up and talk to the judge individually, and they would kind of flush whatever the issue is out. The judge then makes a decision whether that person is allowed to stay in the panel or not. And the attorneys get to talk to the judge also, whether they agree or disagree. Then they put 12 people in the jury box, and as a prosecutor, what I get is I get their criminal history. So if you're a convicted felon, you can't sit on a jury, but if you have misdemeanor offenses or traffic offenses, you are allowed to sit on a jury. And I would look at their criminal history, and I would look at them. And I always liked people that brought books or newspapers with them, because it shows that they read, and they're not going to sit in this room for half a day and just kind of zone out and count ceiling tiles. That they're interested in things. If I saw somebody that was dressed like a Fruit Loop, I wouldn't want them on my jury. If somebody looked weird, I wouldn't want them on my jury. There's no science to it. I would just look at people. If they were looking at me and seemed like they were engaged, I liked them. We're not allowed to get rid of jurors based on their race. We're not allowed to get rid of jurors based on their gender. There's federal law on that, so I can't say, because you're a female, I don't want you on my jury because of the particular crime, or if you're a particular race, I don't want you on my jury. That I'm not allowed to do that. The defense attorney's not allowed to do that. We do get a certain amount of challenges that we can get rid of people. So I would get 6 strikes, but we don't know a whole lot about them. The only exception to that was when we had the death penalty. There was a much more rigorous jury selection, because the jurors had to be a death penalty qualified juror, in that if the person was convicted of murder in the first degree and the death penalty was going to happen, that they had the ability to vote for the death penalty. Whether or not they did was their decision, but they did not have a moral opposition to the death penalty.
What advice would you give to an aspiring lawyer? One of the things that people told me was, don't get in it for the money. And I know it's kind of a cliche, because that's the reason we do any job. We want to get paid. But I think there's a better way to explain that. The reason you don't get in it for the money is because if you're in it for the money, ironically, you're not going to make any. You do it because you're passionate about it. You do it because you can really bring about change and bring about good things to people. And if you do it that way, at some point in your career, you're going to find out that you're actually making a pretty good living. The other thing I would say to an aspiring lawyer, especially in Delaware, which was the best advice anybody ever gave me, no matter what, just be a good person. We watch TV and lawyers get a particular rap, and it's always the same. You have some, whether it's a movie or TV show, the lawyer's always some kind of snot-nosed jerk. And I've always found the best lawyers are ones that can level with their client, can level with, you know, opposing counsel, can level with a judge, and especially if you're a trial attorney. You know, when you go in front of a jury, these are not lawyers, you know, and if you can't explain the law in a, you know, level-headed manner, then there's no way you're going to win. It doesn't matter if you were number one in your class in law school, you're never going to win. So, you know, there are a lot of different legal areas to get into. I've done a lot of them. I've done real estate, done civil work, criminal work, obviously. Some people love doing estate planning, but at the end of the day, if you're going to be a lawyer, and you don't really need to know what kind of law you want to get into, but you have to really love, you know, at the end of the day, you really need to love helping people, because that's ultimately what you're doing.
And I'll kind of piggyback on that. I agree. I mean, I'm kind of a people person. I enjoy helping people, and I think that's what I'm able to do. But when I started in the office, the Attorney General at that point in time was Jane Brady. You're all probably too young to remember her. She was the Attorney General, and then she was a Superior Court judge. What I was instructed was, do the right thing. No matter what, do the right thing. And whether or not my bosses agreed or disagreed with how I handled a case, if I felt I did the right thing, they may say I don't agree with you, but if that's what I felt was right, then that was the best thing to do. And that's, you know, not to get preachy with all of you, but that's just kind of a good way to handle yourself in general. Just do the right thing, and things will work out for you.
I think it's also good to set your goals, but you guys are all, I believe, in 10th grade, is that correct?
10th and 11th.
10th and 11th. You know, and I tell a lot of people this, when I was in high school, the thought of being a lawyer had never crossed my mind. I mean, I was focused on sports, my social life, and school, pretty much in that order. I got decent grades. I wasn't lighting the world on fire. When I went to college, I was pretty much focused on sports, my social life, and school. I did better in college, but it really wasn't until I was a junior or senior in college when I thought, you know what, I think I might want to get into going to law school, you know, and obviously I said maybe I might parlay that into the FBI. But, you know, at the same time, I was kind of like, well, I go to law school, it gives me another summer off. You know, I can spend it at the beach.
Avoid getting a real job.
Avoid getting a real job. So if there's anybody sitting out there that thinks that, you know, these are guys that have been driven since day one. I mean, I was kind of a knucklehead. So it was something that we gradually got into where we are. So, and we're totally aware of that. What's our next question?
Next question is, do either of you at all feel the death penalty is necessary for cases, or do you feel like no matter the charge, it would be too much? You know, the death penalty in the United States has been a source of controversy for a long time. A lot of states have gotten rid of it. Some states still have it. I think I mentioned earlier that Delaware does not have it anymore. I think that personally, I think that the death penalty is a worthwhile tool. It's a punishment to be used in very selective cases. Not all murder, and we only used it in homicide cases and first-degree homicide. I think it has to be reserved for the most egregious cases, and you don't hear people being executed all the time. It's not used that much, but I think it's something that has some necessity in our society, but the utilization of it has to be very controlled. You know, when we would have meetings about how we were going to proceed on homicide cases, we would have statewide meetings. the conversation we would have on a death penalty case would always start with death is different. And I think everybody in the system appreciated that when we were going to proceed on a case seeking the death penalty, it's a different way we handle it. It's a different way we look at it, just because the punishment is so serious. I think it needs to be very narrowly utilized.
Have you ever refused a case based on your morality? That's a very good, very deep question. No, I have not. And when I was sworn in as an attorney, and also when I was sworn in as a prosecutor, part of your oath is to basically zealously defend your position, no matter what that is. As a prosecutor, my feeling was I am a part of this office, and my job is to prosecute cases. There are some people that don't like to get assigned sex crimes because you're dealing oftentimes with young children, and they're pretty tough to take. But my feeling was, if you're a prosecutor, you sometimes have to work through that. As a defense attorney, there are a lot of people that I represent that, I don't share the same values, but the oath that I took as an attorney, everybody has a right to a defense. That doesn't mean I'm going to get a guilty person off. What it means is people are innocent until proven guilty, and it's the state's job to prove each and every element, and they do that through evidence. And if they can't do that, then really by the Constitution, the defendant is not guilty. But sometimes you're dealing with people that have done some pretty reprehensible things, and even those people are entitled to a defense. Now, your defense may be different depending on how strong the case is. Sometimes the evidence is overwhelming, and you're really not focused on are they guilty or not, but you're really focused on the level of punishment. Is there a mental health issue going on? Is there a drug or alcohol issue going on? There are a lot of things that play into it, and that kind of becomes your focus. So for me, that's how I get around the morality question, because you're focused on so many different areas. But when you're an attorney, in my opinion, you've got to take the good with the bad.